Good evening. Welcome to part 3 of campaign finance reform. If you're still listening, you deserve a medal. Okay, so what you should have heard last week was Buckley versus Vallejo and the Federal Elections Campaign Act, which was Congress's first attempt to regulate campaign finance. All right, due to a lot of problems in the 90s and a flood of what was called soft money, Congress reacted again in 2002 with the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act, also known as McCain Feingold. All right. Um, Obviously bipartisan, McCain being the Republican from Arizona, Feingold being the Wisconsin Democrat. Okay. The main thing that it did, you're going to see a nice long list here built up, but the main thing it did is it increased contribution limits. Now, how does that limit campaign finance? We'll get to that in a little bit. Okay, so what was called hard money was increased from the previous number. All right, you used to be able to only give $1,000 to a candidate. Now you are giving two. All right, the other key thing besides this two, all right, it is going to be indexed for inflation, meaning that each year as inflation goes up, which is measured by the consumer price index, all right, the contribution limits will go up as well. So in this last election cycle, it was $2,500 was the limit, okay? But it started out at two. PAC contributions, believe it or not, remain the same at $5,000, and $95,000 is your total. This number right here is what we are challenging in Thursday's court case, McCutcheon versus FEC, challenging that number. Now, that has also grown for inflation, but McCutcheon is arguing that that is limiting his free speech and that he can only donate so much money to a candidate. All right? Moving along, okay. Why do you think the individual contribution limit was raised in 2002? All right? And the answer, as I already said, is to account for inflation. Okay, so there's an index built in. It goes up every year. It was 2,300 in 08 cycle, 2,200, I believe, in the 2004 election. So it continues to go up as inflation goes up. All right. Also, it prohibited the national parties from raising soft money. All right, meaning all money had to be given under the limits and disclosed. So you could give money to a party directly, all right, but as you saw on that slide there, that was limited to $25,000. So that's the most you can give to a party, all right, but you cannot give them soft money, which is unregulated money, unlimited money, that's for party building activities. But if I want to give the party 25 grand to help a candidate, I can do that. I cannot give them any money for, quote, party building activities, which is the definition of soft money. All right? You can sort of see why there was a need to pass this. Look at soft money. It continued to grow. All right? You'll also notice the Republicans tend to benefit a tad bit more from it than the Democrats do. So it was a partisan issue as well. Most Democrat soft money came from unions. Most Republican soft money came from, you guessed it, corporations. All right. It required the state and local parties to pay for federal elections with hard money. So if the Lake County Republicans or the Illinois Republicans want to donate money, it has to all be hard money. Hard money meaning that it is limited and disclosed. That's what makes it hard money. We know who gives it, we know where it goes, and it is limited by law. All right, they cannot use any state federal money to do that. Now, can they use soft money for state and local elections? Yes, because the federal government, since they're federal elections, they can regulate what state and local parties do. All right. Also prohibited the candidates from raising or spending soft money. So that's the big thing you got to get out of McCain Feingold is no soft money any longer. All right, you can't raise it, the parties or the candidates. Okay, it prohibited corporations and unions from using soft money for electioneering communications. I will cover what electioneering communications are later. All right, this is really the big one that was challenged in Citizens United, which I will do another video on here momentarily. So corporations and unions cannot use any soft money for electioneering communications, basically to communicate with voters. Okay? It required the disclosure of electioneering from all communications. What does disclosure mean? It means at the end of every ad, it will say, I'm so-and-so and I approve this message. You might see it at the beginning of ads too. There's a reason why some are at the beginning and some are at the end. We'll cover that later. Okay, so any ad you put out, electioneering has to say who paid for it who distribute it. Now, what does electioneering communications looks like? All right, it's anything that's broadcast over the air. That's pretty simple. It clearly identifies a candidate by name. Doesn't necessarily have to say vote for or against, but it references that candidate. It is publicly distributed by a TV or radio station, cable, or satellite system for a fee. All right, so anything that's put over the air. And it's considered electioneering if it is within 60 days of a general election or 30 days prior to a primary election. Okay, anything outside of that window is basically speech and can support anybody one way or the other. But if it's close to an election, it's considered electioneering, and the law can outlaw that. That has since been overturned, however. That's why you saw so many ads right before the election, because it was considered free speech and cannot be regulated. All right, here's an example of an electioneering ad, okay, in Kentucky. Okay, so this ran right before the midterms in 1998. It says if Congressman Bunning gets his way, everything from milk to medicine would cost 30% more. So it does specify a candidate, and it was on television. Last week, Bunning said, quote, we ought to have a national sales tax. That's right. Bunning would create a whole new federal tax. Bunning wants to raise our taxes, but voted for a tax loophole that has let billionaires renounce their citizenship to avoid paying U.S. taxes. Tell Bunning, no loophole for billionaires, no sales tax for working people. Now, originally, the idea was this would be a perfectly fine ad because it didn't say to vote against Jim Bunning or to vote for his opponent. It was just electioneering. It was communicating with us about the issue. It was telling us about the candidate, right? But now, since it specifies a candidate, it's considered electioneering, and it's banned before an election. Okay, so you could not run this ad before that, even if you were not with the candidate. Now, if you said vote for Bunning, that's considered a coordinated expenditure, meaning you are working with the campaign, and candidates usually have to specify whether they're going to work in conjunction with the candidate or against, or independently. So the opposite of a coordinated expenditure is an independent expenditure. Independent meaning you are spending this money totally without their knowledge or their coordination. All right. The next thing, it required the parties to choose between coordinated or independent. So if the Republican Party wants to support Mark Kirk, they could totally work with his campaign and stay within the limits, or they could be independent but not both. All right, you'll see later that was found unconstitutional. All right, which of the following is considered an independent expenditure? This is key. It's an important term you have to know because it is not subject to campaign regulations other than the recent McCain Feingold law. Okay. So if I run an ad informing people of an opponent's voting record, okay, that is an independent expenditure. If I buy Joe Walsh some signs, that's coordinated because I'm working with his campaign. If I hire a staff member to conduct polls, that's coordinated as well. And if I fly Dole to speak, I'm working with the candidate to come speak to my headquarters. I'm working with him. So this is the independent one here because the candidate does not know anything about that. I'm working independent of them. All right, and then finally, it prohibited minors from contributing, okay, because they're union workers and they work in those dirty coal mines and are exposed to all those poisons. No, we're talking about you guys. You guys cannot contribute money according to this law, at least so we think. All right, now the before column you already have, so don't write that down again. That should already be in your notes. After is everything that the court case of McConnell versus FEC upheld. So everything was good except this one. Candidates do not have, or parties do not have to choose. They can do both. They can make an independent expenditure on their own, but then they can also coordinate it with the campaign, but it has to stay within the limits of the hard money contributions. And minors are said to have free speech rights, so we cannot ban kids from contributing to campaigns. All right, so McConnell basically upheld everything in McCain Feingold for the most part, okay? And this case was expedited to the Supreme Court. Basically, it was passed, and as soon as Congress passed it, they said, let's send it to the court, let's make sure it's okay, because by 2004, we have an election to worry about, and we need to know what the rules of the game are. All right? I will pick up with a new video to talk about 527, Super PACs, and Citizens United. Thanks for listening. Goodbye.